In today's Burning Archive, I'm bringing you a reading of Kamo no Chōmei's Hōjōki. On the Burning Archive, I bring you readings of some of the great works of history and literature to help you live in tune with a changing world. Kamo no Chōmei's Hōjōki. It is a classic work of Japanese literature from the 12th century that speaks to us today as we try to live a mindful life in a changing world. Kamo no Chōmei lived in Japan near Kyoto in between 1155 and 1216. His Hōjōki on the surface is the story of a literary recluse who retreats to a 10-foot square hut, the meaning of Hōjōki in Japanese, a kind of tiny house where he will practice slow, simple living. It is written in the Buddhist tradition, so this story of retreat is really about detachment, initially from despair at the sufferings of the world, and then, but I will leave the ending for you to discover. It is a meditation on impermanence, and so also a meditation on history. Chōmei narrates the impact on the people of Kyoto and Japan of the power struggles in the Fujiwara dynasty of the mid-12th century and how people responded to disasters of fire, typhoon, earthquake and plague, as well as civil strife. Then Chōmei describes his retreat to his 10-foot square hut. It appears to be the serene life of an enlightened hermit, but is it really? In one of world literature's great surprises, you will find the answer at the end of this video. Please enjoy, like, share and subscribe, and you can support the Burning Archive, help you live in tune with a changing world at the links in the video description below. Now to Kamo no Chōmei's Hōjōki, which begins with a metaphor of our lives as the bubbles on a stream. Please enjoy.
Kamo no Chōmei, or Rin, Hōjōki. On flows the river ceaselessly, nor does its water ever stay the same. The bubbles that float upon its pools now disappear, now form anew, but never endure long. And so it is with people in this world and with their dwellings. In our dazzling capital, the houses of high and low crowd the streets, a jostling throng of roof and tile, and have done so down the generations. Yet ask if this is truly so, and you discover that almost no house has been there from of old. Some burned down last year and this year were rebuilt. Others were once grand mansions, gone to ruin, where now small houses stand. And it is the same with those that live in them. The places remain as full of people as ever, but of those one saw there once, now only 1 or 2 in 20 or 30 still survive. Death in the morning, at evening another birth. This is the way of things, no different from the bubbles on the stream. Where do they come from, these newborn? Where do the dead go? I do not know, nor do I know why our hearts should fret over these brief dwellings, or our eyes find such delight in them. An owner and his home vie in their impermanence as the vanishing dew upon the morning glory. The dew may disappear while the flower remains, yet it lives on only to fade with the morning sun. Or perhaps the flower wilts while the dew still lies, but though it stays, it too will be gone before the evening. Over the more than 40 rounds of seasons since I first grew conscious of the world about me, I have seen many extraordinary things. It would have been the 28th day in the 4th month of the 3rd year of Angan. The wind was fierce and the night tumultuous, and at the hour of the dog a fire broke out in the capital's southeast and spread to the northwest. Eventually the Shujaku Gate, the Hall of State, the University Hall and the Civil Affairs Bureau all caught fire, and in a single night were reduced to ashes. It was said the fire started in Hōjōki, Tomanokoji, and began in a lodging house where some dancers were staying. The flames spread hither and yon on the fickle wind, fanning out wide over the city. Houses beyond were choked with smoke, while from those nearby flames spouted and sparks rained down. Clouds of ash poured up into the sky, lit red by the fire beneath, and in the midst of all this blazing scarlet, the ragged flames leapt whole blocks at a time, flying unresisting on the wind. For those caught up in the blaze, it must have seemed a nightmare. Some fell choked with smoke, others were blinded by the flames and quickly perished. Where others managed to escape with their life, they left behind them all their worldly goods. All those countless treasures were turned to dust and ash. How much was lost, all told? In this fire, 16 noble houses alone were destroyed, not to mention the countless others. It is said that fully 1/3 of the capital was lost. Scores of men and women died, and who knows how many horses and oxen besides. All human undertaking is folly, but it is most particularly futile to spend your wealth and trouble your peace of mind by building a house in the perilous capital. Again, in the 4th month, the 4th year of Jisho, a great whirlwind sprang up in the Nakamikado Kyogoku area and swept down through the city to around Rokujo. Over 3 or 4 blocks, every single house, large or small, in the path of the swirling wind was destroyed. Some were utterly flattened, while only the pillars and beams of others remained. The wind tore up gates and brought them down 4 or 5 blocks away. It blew away fences, making houses one with their neighbours. Needless to say, every last belonging inside the houses flew into the air, while cypress bark, thatch and shingles swirled in the gale like winter leaves. The wind raised such a spiralling smoke of dust that the eye was quite blinded, and the dreadful roar drowned out all speech. The karmic wind of hell itself would be such as this, it seemed. Not only houses were damaged, countless people were hurt or maimed in trying to repair them. At length the wind moved off south-southwest, causing grief to many. Whirlwinds are quite common, but do they ever blow like this? This was no ordinary wind, and all wondered whether it was not some portent from on high. Also in the 6th month of the 4th year of Jisho, the capital was suddenly relocated, confounding everyone. One generally hears it is said that this city has been the capital since it was so designated in the time of Emperor Saga, more than 400 years ago. It should never have been moved arbitrarily on a casual whim like that, and it was only too natural that everyone was so distressed and anxious. But complaints availed them nothing. Everyone, from the emperor to his ministers and nobles, was obliged to move, and how could any among those in attendance at the palace choose to remain back there alone in the old capital? Those hoping to advance their rank and position, those who relied on the emperor's support, strove to make the move as soon as possible, while others who had missed their moment, had been passed over in life, and could hope for no advancement, stayed behind and grieved. As the days passed, ruin fell upon those fine houses with their jostling throng of roofs. The buildings were dismantled and floated down the Yodo, and before our eyes the land turned to cropping fields. Tastes changed. Now everyone prized only the horse and saddle, and the ox and carriage went quite unused. Now property on the southwest seaboard was sought after, while no one cared for estates to the north or east. And around this time I happened to have reason to visit the new capital, so I went down to Setsu. Looking around, I noted that the area was too cramped to be sectioned off into proper wards. To the north the land rose steeply up to mountains, while to the south it sloped straight down to the nearby sea. There was a constant crash of waves, and a fierce offshore wind blew. The imperial palace stood back in the hills and was rather reminiscent of how the old log palace might have looked, almost charming in its eccentricity. Where could all those houses be that had day after day been dismantled and floated downstream in such quantities that they clogged the waterways? Empty plots were everywhere, buildings were few. The old capital was now a ruin, while the new had yet to rise. Every last person felt suspended, unsettled, adrift as floating clouds. The place's former residents lamented the loss of their land. Those who had moved there bewailed the difficulties of building, Along the roads I witness men who should by rights travel in a carriage sitting astride a horse, and courtiers who would normally be dressed in court robes, wearing instead the new hitatare. The old capital's ways had undergone a sudden transformation, and fashions now were indistinguishable from the uncouth country warriors. It is said that changes in customs presage times of upheaval, and indeed it was so, for as the days passed all grew increasingly disturbed and restive, until at length the people's grievances bore fruit, and in the winter of that year the capital was returned to its former site. Who knows what happened to all the houses that were dismantled and taken down there, however, for many were never restored. It is told that in the days of the wise rulers of old, the land was governed with compassion. The eaves of the reed-thatched palace roofs were left untrimmed, and if the emperor saw only a thin trail of smoke rising from his people's cooking fires, he excused them payment of even the stipulated taxes. This was because these rulers were given to benevolence and service to their people. We need only compare our present age to theirs to see the difference. Again, around the Iowa era, I believe it was, although so much time has passed that I no longer quite remember, there was a terrible 2-year famine in the world, drought in spring and summer, typhoons and floods in autumn. Disaster followed on disaster, and all the crops failed. In vain did people till the fields in spring and plant in summer. Autumn and winter brought no bustling harvest, no storing up of food. All this drove people throughout the provinces to leave their land and migrate elsewhere, or desert their homes and simply take to the hills. Various prayers to the gods were instigated and fervent Buddhist ceremonies performed at the palace, but to no avail. All the capital's many activities essentially depended on the countryside, and once provisions ceased to arrive, what hope was there of keeping up even a semblance of normalcy? People were driven to offer all their treasured possessions to buyers for a song, but no one would so much as glance at them. And if any exchange did happen to be made, money meant almost nothing, while grain was everything. Beggars crowded the roadsides, and the sounds of their wailing filled the ears. So the first year drew somehow to a close. We hoped for recovery in the new year, but instead a plague was added to our woes, and every semblance of the old life was now gone. All despaired, and we were like fish in a fast-drying pond as calamity tightened its grip on the world from day to day. Finally, those who still looked reasonably presentable took to the streets, clad in hats and leggings, going from door to door, desperately begging. These miserable wretches could be seen staggering along 1 minute and fallen the next. Countless numbers starved to death by walls and on roadsides. None knew how to dispose of all these corpses, The air was filled with their stench, and one could only avert the eyes from the frequent sight of slowly decomposing bodies. As for the dry riverbed, the bodies lay so thick that there was no room for horses and carts to pass. The poor woodcutters and other common folk could no longer carry wood from exhaustion, so even fuel became scarce in the city, and those who had nowhere else to turn were reduced to tearing down their own houses and selling the wood in the marketplace. It was said that the price for what a man could carry there would not even keep him alive a day. Strangely, among the wood sold for fuel, one saw some with touches of cinnabar or gold leaf. On inquiry, I learned that some, as a last resort, were going to run down old temples, stealing the Buddhist images, dismantling the decorative woodwork in the worship hall, and breaking these up to sell. Born into these vile latter days, it has been my lot to witness such heart-breaking things, and I saw other pitiful things besides. Where a man could not bear to part from his wife, or a woman loved her husband dearly, it was always the one whose love was the deeper who died first. In their sympathy for the other, they would put themselves second and give their partner any rare morsel that came their way. So also, if parent and child lived together, the parent was always the first to die. A baby would still lie suckling, unaware that its mother was dead. A monk by the name of Ryūgyō Hoin from Ninnaji, sorrowing to see people dying in such countless numbers, took to inscribing the sacred Sanskrit syllable "A" on the forehead of any he met with, to lead them to rebirth in paradise. When a count was made of all the dead, the total for the 4th and 5th months came to over 42,300 in the area from Ichijo south and from Kujo north, from East Kyogoku west and Shujaku east. Of course, there were many who died before and after this time, and if all the outlying areas such as the Kamo riverbed, Shirokawa and the Nishinokyo were added in, the numbers would be incalculable, and how much more so with the provinces beyond. Such things also happened, I have heard, in the reign of Emperor Sutoku, back in the Chosho era, but I know nothing of the experience of those times. What I have seen with my own eyes was certainly strange and dreadful. Also around the same time, as I recall, there was a great earthquake, and a quite exceptional one it was. Mountainsides collapsed, damming the streams, and the sea tilted up and flooded over the land. Water gushed from the rent earth. Great rocks split asunder and tumbled into the valleys below. Boats rowing offshore were tossed in the waves, while horses lost their footing on the roads. Not a single temple building or pagoda around the capital remained intact. Some collapsed, others leaned and fell. Like thick plumes of smoke, the dust rose. The roar of shuddering earth and the crash of buildings resounded like thunder. Anyone indoors was sure to be crushed, but we rushed out only to find the earth split open at our feet. Lacking wings, there could be no escaping to the air. Had we only been dragons, we might have fled to the clouds. Among all the terrors, I realized then the most terrifying is an earthquake. The dreadful shaking soon ceased, but the aftershocks continued for some time. Not a day passed without 20 or 30 tremors of a strength that would normally seem startlingly strong. Finally, 10 or 20 days later, the intervals between them lengthened. It would be 4 or 5 times a day, then 2 or 3, then every second day, then once in 2 or 3. All told, the aftershocks must have been felt for around 3 months. Of the 4 elements, water, fire and wind commonly inflict harm, while earth causes no great disruptions. Back in the old days, perhaps in the Saiko era, there was a great earthquake that knocked off the head of the Buddha of Todaiji Temple and caused tremendous damage, but it was not as bad as this. At the time, all spoke of how futile everything was in the face of life's uncertainties, and their hearts seemed, for a while, a little less clouded by worldliness. But time passed, and now, years later, no one so much as mentions that time. Yes, take it for all in all, this world is a hard place to live, and both we and our dwellings are fragile and impermanent, as these events reveal. And besides, there are the countless occasions when situation or circumstance cause us anguish. Imagine you are someone of no account who lives next to a powerful man. There may be something that deeply delights you, but you cannot go ahead and express your joy. If something has brought you terrible grief, you cannot raise your voice and weep. You worry over your least action and tremble with every move you make, like a sparrow close to a falcon's nest. Or take a poor man who lives next to a rich one. Ashamed at the sorry sight he makes, he is forever cringing obsequiously before his neighbour as he comes and goes. He must witness his wife and children and his servants filled with envy, and have to hear how the neighbour despises him, and each fresh thought will unsettle him so that he has not a moment's tranquillity. If you live in a cramped city area, you cannot escape disaster when a fire springs up nearby. If you live in some remote place, commuting to and fro is filled with problems, and you are in constant danger from thieves. A powerful man will be beset by cravings. One without family ties will be scorned. Wealth brings great anxiety, while with poverty come fierce resentments. Dependence on others puts you in their power, while care for others will snare you in the worldly attachments of affection. Follow the social rules and they hem you in. Fail to do so, and you are thought as good as crazy. Where can one be? What can one do to find a little safe shelter in this world and a little peace of mind? I came into house and property through my paternal grandmother and lived there for many years. Later my ties of the place were broken. I came down in the world, and for all my fond memories, I eventually had to leave my home. Past 30, I chose to build another little house. It was a mere tenth the size of my former house. I built only a single dwelling for myself. There was no means to add any decent outbuildings. I managed to put a wall around it, but funds did not stretch to a front gate. I used bamboo as the frame for a shed to hold the carriage. Things were always far from safe whenever snow fell or the wind blew. The place was near the river, so was in deep danger of flooding, and robbers were a constant source of worry. All told, I spent some 30 troubled years withstanding the vagaries of this world. At each new setback, I understood afresh how wretched my luck is. And so, in the spring of my 50th year, I came to leave my home and take the tonsure, and turned my back on the world. I had never had wife and children, so there were no close ties that were difficult to break. I had no rank and salary to forego. What was there to hold me to the world? I made my bed among the clouds of Ohara's mountains, and there I passed 5 fruitless years. Now, at 60, with the dew of life about to fade, I have fashioned for myself another dwelling to hold me for these final years. I am, if you will, like a traveller who throws up a shelter for the night, or an old silkworm spinning his cocoon. It is not 100th the size of the house of my middle years. As I complained my way through life, each passing year has added to my age, and each move reduced my dwelling. This house looks quite unlike a normal one. It is a mere 10 feet square and less than 7 feet high. Since I was not much concerned about where I lived, I did not construct the house to fit the site. I simply set up a foundation, put up a bit of a roof, and fastened each joint with a metal catch, so that if I didn't care for one place, I could easily move to another. Just how much trouble would it be to rebuild after all? The house would take a mere 2 cartloads to shift, and the only expense would be the carrier. Since retiring here to Mount Hino, I have added a 3-foot awning on the east side of my hut, beneath which to store firewood and cook. On the south I put up a veranda of bamboo slats with an offerings shelf at its western end. Inside there is a standing screen dividing off the northwest section of the room, where I have set up a painted image of Amida with another of the Bodhisattva Fulgen hung next to it, and a copy of the Lotus Sutra placed before them. At the room's eastern edge I have spread a tangle of bracken to serve as bed. A shelf hangs from the ceiling in the southwest corner, holding 3 black leather boxes that contain extracts from the poetic anthologies, musical treatises, essentials of salvation, and so forth. Besides this stand 1 koto and 1 biwa. The koto is the folding kind. The biwa has a detachable neck. Such is my temporary abode. As for its surroundings, to the south is a bamboo water pipe, and I have placed rocks there to make a pool. The forest is close by the house, so I am not short of brushwood to gather. The name of the place is Toyama. Vines cover the paths, trees throng the nearby valley, but the land is open to the west. Indeed, there are not a few aids to my meditations. In spring I gaze upon swathes of wisteria, which hang shining in the west like the purple clouds that bear the soul to heaven. In summer I hear the song of the Hōjōki, and at each call he affirms his promise to lead me over the mountain path of death. In autumn, the voice of the cricket fills my ears, a sound that seems to sorrow over a fleeting life so soon cast off. In winter, the snow fills me with pathos. The sight of it piling high only to melt and vanish is like the mounting sins that block our path to redemption, which penitence will erase. When I tire of chanting the Nenbutsu and feel disinclined to read the sutras, I can choose to rest and laze as I wish. There is no one to stand in my way or to shame me. Though I have taken no vow of silence, my solitude protects me from the evils of speech. I make no special effort to abide by the precepts, but with such conducive surroundings, what could lead me to break them? On mornings when my thoughts turn to the white retreating waves of this transient life, I gaze out to the boats that ply the river at Okanoya and savour as my own the feelings of the old poet novice Mansei. On evenings when the wind rustles in the leaves of the katsura trees, I cast my thoughts back to Zunyang Inlet and pluck my biwa in the way of Sunenobu. And if the mood is still upon me, often I play to the sough of wind in the pines, the piece called autumn wind music, or flowing spring to the murmur of running water. My skill is poor, but then I do not aim to please the ears of others. I play alone, I sing alone, simply for my own fulfillment. There is a little brushwood shack at the foot of the mountain, the home of the local warden. He has a little boy who sometimes comes to visit, and in idle hours I go off rambling with him. He is 10, I am 60. A vast difference in age, yet we find our pleasure in the same things. We pick the seed heads of grasses, collect rock pear berries, gather mountain yams, or pluck wild parsley. At other times we might go down to the rice fields to glean the fallen ears of rice and sheave them up. If the day is fine, we scramble up to the peak and gaze off to the skies of the capital, my old home, or look out over Mount Kohato, Fushimi Village, Toba, and Hatsukashi. No one owns a splendid view, so nothing prevents the heart's delight in it. If the walk is not too much for me, and I feel inclined to go further afield, I follow the ridgeline over Mount Sumi and Kasadori to pay my respects at Iwama or Ishiyama temples. At other times, I might go on over the plain of Awazu to call on Semimaru's old site, or cross Tanakami River to visit the grave of Sarumaro. On my way back, depending on the season, I may linger over the cherry blossoms, search out the autumn leaves, pluck young fern shoots, or gather nuts as I go, as offerings for the altar or as gifts to take home. On quiet nights, the moon at my window recalls to me past friends, and tears wet my sleeve at the cries of the monkeys. The fireflies in the nearby grass blend their little lights with the fishermen's fires of distant Makinoshima. The sound of dawn rain comes to me like a storm wind in the treetops. When I hear the soft cry of the pheasant, it seems to me my own father or mother. The mountain deer that have learned to come so close reveal to me how distant from the world I have become. There are times when I stir the embers of my fire to keep me company in the wakefulness of old age. There is nothing to fear from this mountain. The owl's cry is poignant to my ears, and through the seasons I never tire of the mountain's moving beauties. And for one who thought and understood more deeply still than I, this place would surely hold yet greater joys. When I first came to live here, I thought my time would be brief, but already 5 years have passed. This passing shelter of mine has slowly become a home. The eaves are deep in rotting leaves. Moss covers the foundations. When news of the capital happens to come my way, I learn of many people in high places who have met their end since I retired to this mountain, and other lesser folk besides, too many to be told. And how many houses too have been lost in all those fires. In all this my mere passing shelter has remained tranquil and safe from fears. Small it may be, but there is a bed to sleep on at night and a place to sit in the daytime. As a simple place to house myself, it lacks nothing. The hermit crab prefers a little shell for his home. He knows what the world holds. The osprey chooses the wild shoreline, and this is because he fears mankind. And I too am the same. Knowing what the world holds and its ways, I desire nothing from it, nor chase after its prizes. My one craving is to be at peace, my one pleasure to live free of troubles. People do not always build a house with the important things in mind. Some will build for wife and children or for the wider household, others for their intimates and friends. Some may build for their master or their teacher, or even for their possessions or their oxen and horses. But I have built this house for my own self and for no one else. And this is because, the world being what it is, and the way I am now, I have no one who shares my life, nor any servants to work for me. Who would I put in a larger house if I built one, after all? People who cultivate friendships prize men with wealth and prefer those who are eager to please. They do not always cherish friends who are loving or pure of heart. Best by far is the company of flute and strings, and of the flowers and moon. Servants and retainers crave endless rewards, and love a master who showers them with favours. They have no interest in affectionate concern or a calm and peaceful life. Better far to be your own servant. How? If something needs doing, use yourself to do it. It may be tiring, but it is easier than employing another and troubling yourself over him. If you need to go somewhere, walk yourself. You may grow weary, but better far than worrying over horse and saddle, oxen and cart. These days I divide myself into 2 uses. These hands are my servants, these feet my transport. They serve me just as I wish. Mind knows when things feel hard for the body. At such times it will grant the body rest and work it when it is willing. Yet, work the body though it does, the mind will never push too far. And if the body is reluctant, this will not perturb the mind. Indeed, the habit of walking and working is good for the health. Why sit idly about, after all? It is a sin to bring trouble to others. why should I borrow another's strength? So too with food and clothing, be it robe of vine fibre or hempen quilt, I cover myself in whatever comes to hand and keep myself alive with wild asters from the fields and nuts from the mountains. Since I do not mix with others, shame causes me no regrets. Plain fare tastes all the better when food is scarce. I do not make claims for these pleasures to disparage the rich. I am simply comparing my past life with my present one. The triple world is solely mind. Without a peaceful mind, elephants, horses, and the 7 treasures are worthless things. Palaces and fine towers mean nothing. I love my tiny hut, my lonely dwelling. When I chance to go down into the capital, I am ashamed of my lowly beggar status. But once back here again, I pity those who chase after the sordid rewards of the world. If any doubt my words, let them look to the fish and the birds. Fish never tire of water, a state incomprehensible to any but the fish. The bird's desire for the forest makes sense to none but birds. And so it is with the pleasure of seclusion. Who but one who lives it can understand its joys? Like the moon that hangs above the mountain rim, my life now tilts towards its close. Soon I will enter the darkness of the 3 paths. What point is there in mulling over past actions? The Buddha's essential teaching is to relinquish all attachment. This fondness for my hut, I now see, must be error, and my attachment to a life of seclusion and peace is an impediment to rebirth. How could I waste my days like this, describing useless pleasures? In the quiet dawn I ponder this and question my own heart. You fled the world to live among forest and mountain in order to discipline the mind and practice the Buddhist way. But though you have all the trappings of a holy man, your heart is corrupt. Your dwelling may aspire to be the hut of the holy Vimalakirti himself, but the practice you maintain in it cannot match even that of the fool Suripanthaka. Have you, after all, let the poverty ordained by past sins distract you? Or have your delusions tipped you over into madness? When I confront my heart thus, it cannot reply. At most, this mortal tongue can only end in 3 faltering invocations of the holy, unapproachable name of Amida. Written in his hut on Toyama at the close of the 3rd month in the 2nd year, Kenryaku, by the monk Renyin.